Hello and welcome to the channel. Zach D Productions here, and I'm here for a different kind of video for you guys. So for this video, I'll be going over 5 underrated albums from the band Rush. Rush is probably one of my favorite bands, and of course one of my favorites in the progressive rock genre. Now this segment that I'm doing here, there's no guarantee that I'll do this for other bands too. I might do this for other bands, go over underrated albums from a band in one video. That's something that I might do. You guys let me know if that's something that you would like to see more of on this channel. So we're going to talk about some Rush for this video, and I'll be going over, in my opinion, their most underrated albums. Now, some of these you could argue it's debatable about whether or not some of these are considered underrated, but underappreciated at the very least anyways, especially with the first album that we're going to talk about here. So the first album here is their self-titled debut, Rush, and yeah, again, could be debatable on whether or not this album is underrated in their discography. But, I mean, I wouldn't argue with someone if they said that, yeah, this was one of their most underrated albums. So it was like, I'll throw it on the list because, you know, from what I've seen, there's not a lot of Rush fans that give much recognition to this album. And I think the reason is because, you know, it's not as prog as some of their other albums, or it doesn't feature Neil Peart with the band. But honestly, I still think it's a great album. I mean, yeah, I've heard some people say that it's basically a, you know, Rush being Led Zeppelin, like they started out like Led Zeppelin or whatever, which, you know, I am a Led Zeppelin fan, so yeah, I of course don't see a problem there, but this album does have some really good songs, some of their heaviest work too, I must say. Especially for its time, some of their heaviest stuff is on this album. I mean, of course you got great songs on here like Finding My Way, Here Again, What You're Doing, In the Mood, and Working Man. Working Man is obviously a classic, and if you're a Rush fan, how could you not like this song? Now, with this song being on the album, you could say that that's something that doesn't necessarily make this album underrated, because Working Man is one of their biggest songs, but it's just the song that's, you know, recognizable and very successful in the band's career. But the album as a whole, I think, kind of goes underrated, at least to some extent. Sure, you could say it's not, you know, their very most underrated album that they've ever put out, but still, I think the album deserves a little more recognition. So this next album here, you could also make a debate on whether or not it's really underrated, but I have seen some people say that this is one of their most underrated albums, and I can definitely see why. And I'm, of course, talking about Caress of Steel. You know, I think one of the reasons that this album is not as recognized as some of their other albums from the 70s is because as far as release-wise, this album kind of got sandwiched in between Fly By Night and 2112, which are 2 very big albums for Rush. So, you know, I think this album was kind of like caught in the shadow of the success of Fly By Night and even 2112. But yeah, I still think the album is very good. Now, it's probably not as good as those albums, but I still think that the album is very strong. I mean, this does have some of their best epics, of course, like The Necromancer. That's a really great track. Bastille Day is a really great opening track. Lakeside Park, also very good. Fountain of Lameth, also solid. It's, of course, one of their epics, and yeah, if you like long, epic, prog rock epics, definitely check out that song. But yeah, there's a lot to like about this album, and I mean, it's a pretty heavy album too, again, especially for its time. So, Caress of Steel, I think it's a great album. So next, we got Power Windows, which I definitely think this is easily one of Rush's most underrated albums. And I think there's some people that might agree with me on that. There's some people that say that this is one of their worst. I personally don't understand why, because to be honest, there's not a single weak track from this album. I pretty much like all the songs on this album. Now, yeah, if I were to pick out the least favorites, or the two that don't do it for me as much as the others, I probably go with Middletown Dreams and Emotion Detector, but I still think those songs are pretty good. But of course, you got great songs on here like The Big Money, Grand Designs, Manhattan Project, Marathon, Territories, and of course, Mystic Rhythms, which is a more theatrical sounding song. Yeah, I think, one of the reasons that some people don't like this album is because it's too, I guess, synth-driven, sounds too much of its time, sounds too much like the 80s, and because of that, it doesn't sound good to this day, and it doesn't hold up. But I highly disagree with that, because I still really dig the album. I still think it's a great album, and definitely an album that deserves more recognition, in my opinion. So next, we got Counterparts, which I know, once again, a lot of people would agree that this is one of Rush's most underrated albums. And really, you could really say that about any album that they've released in the 90s. Now, Rush, they've never released a bad album, in my opinion, and even though their 90s time may haven't been as strong as, the eras before, I still think the 90s time for Rush was still very good. Probably one of the heaviest times for Rush, as far as sound-wise is concerned. Maybe it's because it had a lot to do with the time that these albums came out, and the same could obviously be said about their 2000s and more modern albums. But as far as Counterparts go, I think this is maybe the best of their 90s time. Now, you do get a lot of mixed responses about, which is some people's favorite of Rush's 90s time, but I probably go with this one. Yeah, some of their heaviest work is on this album, I think. Of course, you got great songs on here like Stick It Out, which is, of course, one of their singles. Really great song. Cut to the Chase, Nobody's Hero, Leave That Thing Alone, and, of course, Cold Fire. Also, really good song. But, yeah, Counterparts, I think it's a really good album. Now, the last album here is Vapor Trails. Now, there's a lot of people that say that this is the worst Rush album, their weakest in their discography. That's something that I may or may not agree with, actually. I'm not actually sure what my least favorite is these days. That's actually really tough, and that really does go to show how strong Rush's discography is, because this album here I still think is really strong. Again, some of their heaviest material is on this album. Now, I know some people complain about the production, and yeah, the production is kind of muddy. It's not the greatest, but, I think it's tolerable, at least. You do got some really good songs on here, like One Little Victory, Ghost Rider, How It Is, which I think is a very underrated Rush song. The title track is not too bad. Earthshine, which is probably my favorite song on the album, or at least my favorite on the second half of the album, but yeah, Vapor Trails, I think it's a good album. Definitely not as bad as many fans might say. But there you have it. That's a list of 5 underrated albums from the band Rush. Feel free to let me know what you guys think. What are some Rush albums that you find to be underrated? Feel free to let me know. So with that being said, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day and take care.